evening in return, then turned to stare at Rigel with disbelief. "Are you determined to alienate everyone tonight? Your uncle is an all-right bloke, you know. He was only trying to help." "Regulus is always only trying to help the family name, he gives little regard for the people who bear it," Rigel said dismissively. "He seeks to control me because he can't control my father. Sooner or later he'll have to accept that I'm my own person." "You can be independent without being rude," Draco pointed out. "All you had to do is thank him for his advice and then go and do whatever you want. If he brings it up after the fact, you could just say you tried and failed to follow his advice." "That only encourages more unwanted advice," she said, chuckling. "When did Pansy knock these subtle manners into you, anyway? Last year you would have been insulted on my behalf." "I just worry you're pushing away allies faster than you can make them," Draco muttered. "I have all the allies I need," she said, smiling reassuringly at him. "Why, I made a new one not half an hour ago while you were wandering off without me." "I wasn't wandering," Draco cut himself off with a frustrated growl. "You are determined to shred my composure at every turn, Rigel." "It's overrated," she told him. "I like your candidness better. You're terrible at this game." She sighed. "Oh dear. If I won't make a good poet or politician, what's left for me in this world?" Draco snorted. "You make a passable clown." "Good point. Maybe I can win over the other competitors with laughter." Rigel tapped her chin in mock contemplation. "Do you think humor translates across cultures?" "Your humor would make a dog whine in any language," Draco said bluntly. Then he pursed his lips, considering. "Maybe as a last resort. They might groan themselves into defeat." She laughed, but it didn't last long. Her friend's smile slid off his face in time with hers. Draco looked a little lost as his eyes searched her face worriedly. "Will you really be all right in there tonight?" She slowly nodded. "Stay with Pansy while it happens," she requested. He agreed easily. They stared at one another in solemn sobriety for a moment, and Rigel reflected that when it came down to it, there weren't any words that could rationalize or make palatable what she was about to do. Their reverie was broken by the amplified clearing of a full throat. Ludo Bagman was calling the gathering to attention in the most abrupt way imaginable. "Ladies and gentlemen, champions, Minister, Lord Riddle, thank you all for coming. In a few moments, the champions will leave to prepare themselves for the night's events, and we invite you all to adjourn to the Quidditch pitch where your VIP stadium boxes await." Bagman waited while the polite murmurs of excitement pittered in and out. "Contestants, you have 1 hour to make yourselves ready and meet back at the gamekeeper's cabin. Good luck." "An hour," Draco repeated, frowning. "That's a while yet. Most of the others have to change," Rigel said. "I have some business to take care of, in any case." He stared at her. "Now?" "Yes," she said, blinking innocently. "Now." Draco sighed and stuck his hand out to grasp hers firmly. "Be careful, Ry. Good luck." "Thanks." She watched him melt into the churning crowd to find his parents. A steady string of glittering people she'd never met before touched her shoulder or elbow on their way by and offered their well wishes and words of confidence. She tried to smile politely at them, but by the dozenth anonymous congratulation she could feel the expression straining. Rigel started making her way toward one of the exits, more than ready to get out of the tent and back into the night air. Minister Fudge and his entourage passed nearby her and she heard the portly politician saying irritably, "Better be more stable than the last one," to a blank-faced Regulus Black. She supposed the ordinary Quidditch stands wouldn't be sufficient to hold all the extra spectators. It spoke of Regulus' extensive political connections that he was allowed the contract for the tournament after what happened at the World Cup. Sirius caught her as she slipped outside, steering her away from prying eyes and around the back of the tent where it was quieter. He hugged her hard, almost as though he couldn't help himself. "I have something for you," he said after a deep breath. He let her go to reach into his pocket and shrink something, a small bag about the size of her head. "James has been asking around the office, and Remus and I have been reaching out to all our old contacts as well. Information on this tournament is being kept close, but we managed to ferret out a few things you should know. I didn't want to risk a letter, since interference in a tournament this political would be bad news for all of us, but, Archie, I don't know how to tell you." There's a dragon. Dad, I know, she said lowly, glancing around to make sure there were no prying ears nearby. I can talk to snakes, remember? I just asked one of the forest serpents to scout around for me. Thank you, and thank the others for looking for information for me, but you don't have to worry. I have a plan for the dragon. Sort of. If running away counted as a plan. Sirius's worry melted into surprise before he beamed at her. Good man. Right, then. This is from Remus and me. He held out the sack to her curious fingers. Officially, James has no part in it. He winked at her, and she smiled back. Her family was really the best, sometimes. Not everyone's relatives would risk political fallout for one another. She opened the bag and pulled out items one by one. First was a bundle of barrier buttons. These will be useful, she murmured, nodding gratefully. Next she withdrew a roll of stickers. Do I need to accessorize or something, she joked. They'll muffle the sound of anything you stick 'em to, Sirius said conspiratorially. For your shoes. Rigel grinned. Brilliant, Dad. When did you come up with that? Marauder Incorporated has been busy this month, Sirius said loftily. Keep going. She took a small cylinder from the bag and held it up to her nose to read in the gathering darkness. Fire-free burn-based. Is it some kind of cooking spray? Sirius chuckled. We originally designed it as a sort of impress your friend by walking through fire gag, but I've beefed up the recipe for you. Mist it over your clothes and skin, and it'll absorb heat that registers above your body temperature. It only lasts about 4 hours, but I'm hoping it'll hold off dragon fire just long enough for you to run. Granted, we haven't tested it against anything more potent than the fireplace, so don't go thinking you're invincible. This is amazing, Dad. Thank you. And thank Remus, and... Pup, you don't have to thank us. Just come back safe, Sirius said, putting a hand on her head and smiling wanly at her. I don't know what I'd do if I ever lost you, Arch. You won't ever have to find out, she promised. At least, even if everything else somehow went wrong in the forest, she knew that she could keep that one promise. Archie would be safe. Sirius cleared his throat and shook his head embarrassedly. Anyway, there's one more thing, from Lily. He dropped a perfectly circular disc of obsidian into her hand. It had a small hole drilled through the center where a string threaded through. To be honest, I don't know exactly what it does, but she was adamant you wear it. I told her it wasn't your style, but you know how women are. Rigel favored him with an unimpressed look and brought the stone up to squint at it more carefully. There's some sort of runic shorthand here, but it's minuscule. I'd need a magnifying spell to read it. She didn't tell you what it does. She tried, but it's a bit above me, Sirius admitted. I gather it's something she's been experimenting with on and off for a while, and since she's been given a leave of absence from work, she's devoted most of her time to perfecting it. Supposedly it can detect different types of magic headed toward you based on its frequency and vector, and some other stuff that sounded pretty technical, and I think it's some kind of defense mechanism. Lily can explain better when you see her next. She says you don't have to activate it or anything, just wear it, and it will work when it needs to. That's ominous, Rigel muttered. Still, she dutifully tied the string to her belt as she added, if Aunt Lily invented it, it's probably both brilliant and terrifying. She stored the rest of the items methodically, placing them in pockets she would remember. 2 of the stickers went onto her boots immediately. I suppose that's all I can do you for, son, Sirius said, looking reluctant to go. She gave him her best Archer smile. The one that said nothing in the world could bring him down. I've got this, Dad. I'll see you after and we'll celebrate how amazingly cool I look on Mirrorvision. Sirius allowed himself to grin back at her. I bet it adds 10 pounds of muscle. Try to catch all the girls who swoon. It would be a twist of fate if the papers tomorrow weren't about the first task but instead the witches, young and old, who fell to their deaths at the sight of the chubby Hogwarts champion, Sirius mused. Dad, she protested. I'm not fat. I'm only saying you'll probably look fat, he corrected her. She sighed dramatically. Go, now. I refuse to be tormented so before my big moment. When Sirius hesitated, clearly torn, she said, more seriously, really, Dad. I've got to get ready. See you after. Right after, he promised. Knock 'em out, kid. I love you. Love you, too. He left, and Rigel took a moment to breathe deeply before squaring her shoulders. She still had work to do, and the first task drew near. She cut through the night toward Hagrid's hut. A twinkling, floating beacon of light hung suspended in the air above it, she supposed, in case any of the competitors weren't sure where exactly it was located. Hermione was pacing before the garden gate when Rigel arrived. "You're here, good," Hermione said with a tense smile. "Give me all the facts, please." Rigel leaned against the fence and began the rundown of what the girl should expect in the dark forest. "You know about the acromantula and the centaurs. The spiders are bigger than anything you're probably imagining. The books will tell you they grow about horse-sized, but the ones in this forest can be twice that tall. Their hides are resistant to spells, and their bite will poison." "Are they fast?" Hermione asked, chewing on her lips. "Very. And they eat people," she added, grimacing. "So best to steer clear. The centaurs of course are beings, which means they can come after you with intelligence. The local herd hates intruders, and about 80% of them will attack a human on sight. Some will leave children alone, but not if they bear weapons, which we do, as they consider a wand to be combative." "Okay," Hermione said weakly. "Avoid the spiders and the centaurs. What else?" Rigel leveled a serious look at the other girl. "I'll be honest, Hermione. Most of my plans tonight involve avoiding and running away. Also in the forest are manticores, quintapids, trolls, chimera, snallygastas, runespers, and at least one Peruvian viper tooth. Plus the Sphinx. A dragon." She began to pace again. "What are they playing at? It can't possibly be humane to keep all those creatures locked up in the same place. Then again, maybe they'll be busy fighting one another and won't notice us. They'll probably be confined to their own areas," Rigel offered. "It's still an enormous risk they are putting us to," Hermione muttered. "And this only the first task. Riddle wants to start it with a bang," Rigel reasoned. "Also, we'll be monitored while we're in the forest, remember. But even if we shoot up red sparks as soon as we see the dragon, it still might roast us before help arrives," Hermione said flatly. Rigel had to admit, that was probably true. Unless they had Medewizards standing by in secret throughout the forest. Somehow, she doubted that would be the case. "So, we avoid as many creatures as we can, and when we can't, we run away," Hermione reiterated. Her face twisted in concern. "We could never outrun a chimera. Nor most of the other things. We use just enough magic to slow it down or stop it long enough to get away," Rigel amended. "If we have to engage something, here's the plan: for spiders and centaurs, target the legs; for quintapids and chimera, the underbelly; for manticores and dragons, the eyes; for snallygastas, the wings; for trolls, the top of the skull. The Sphinx will only try and gut us if we can't answer its riddle, so at least there's a chance for civility there. Got all that?" "And runespers?" Hermione asked impatiently. "Which head is poisonous again?" "I'll take care of the runespers," she said. "But it's the right head." "Fine, then. Legs, underbelly, eyes, wings, skull. Got it, thanks." Hermione's face was a lot scarier when she was processing information, Rigel realized as she watched the girl think furiously. She looked a bit like Lily in the midst of a challenging project, actually. "Step 1 is meeting up," though, Rigel said. "It's unlikely we'll all be sent into the forest together. If we are, great, but if not, I'll find you right off. I'll try to travel on a straight vector to help you find me," Hermione agreed. "Let's talk about strengths and weaknesses, now," Rigel suggested. "Can you ride a broom?" No," the girl said sourly. "They don't agree with me." "Okay, I'll teach you that sometime before the next task," Rigel said, making a mental note. "It'll be useful one day, I promise." "We won't need the extra broom, then." "You brought brooms?" Hermione asked, sounding incredulous. "Of course. Just in case. I already know you can heal. How fast can you run?" Hermione winced. "I'm more of a yoga and Pilates girl, but I won't fall behind." Rigel considered this. Assuming those were workout regimens that didn't involve running, she supposed Hermione could probably sustain a 10 or 11 minute per mile pace if necessary. Not forever, though. Okay. Harry says you're good with charms and transfigurations, yes? Hermione nodded, looking sure of herself. Dueling. Just in defense class, she said. It's normally very structured. I have been working on silent casting, though. That's great, Rigel said. All right. If you're comfortable with it, I'll take lead in the forest. With my sensing ability I can steer us around nearby dangers quickly. Are you fine with taking direction unless you disagree with a course of action? Hermione took a moment to think it over, but nodded decisively once she'd made up her mind. And one more thing, Rigel added. If I tell you to duck or get behind me, just do it, okay? It's not a chivalry thing. There just might come a time you don't want to be standing in front of me. Now, items. What have you brought? Basic first aid kit, water, a bazaar, and an extra hair tie. Hermione grinned sheepishly and fingered her wildly curly ponytail. I thought a wand would be all I needed, though, really. It probably will be, Rigel said, but you never know. Were you a Boy Scout or something? Hermione asked, amused. Rigel didn't know exactly what that was, but she smiled back. Why, are male scouts known to be particularly paranoid? Prepared is the word they use. Hermione laughed softly. It's not a bad thing. What have you brought, then? My potions kit, which includes first aid potions as well. A cloak to better blend into the forest after the task starts. A cut of knives in case I lose my wand, food and water for a few days. Days. Hermione spluttered. Just in case, she reiterated. You never know, I know. The other girl waved her on. Anything else? Several things, Rigel said, smiling self-deprecatingly. With a sudden thought, she fished the roll of stickers Sirius had just given her out of her pocket. In fact, here. Put one on each shoe. Trackers. Hermione guessed. Sound mufflers, Rigel corrected. She followed the stickers with the canister of fire free. Hold still and close your eyes and mouth real quick. What? No way, what is that? Hermione balked. It'll hopefully keep us from being roasted alive by the dragon. No promises, but it should at least lessen the impact. Rigel handed the can over for her inspection. You can spray me first, if you like. Hermione squinted at the label dubiously. I've never heard of this. It's not for sale anywhere yet, Rigel admitted. My family invented it. They wouldn't give it to me if it wasn't safe. The other girl grimaced, but held the nozzle toward herself gamely and began to mist the thick cloud that emerged over her legs. Rigel helped her cover the areas she couldn't reach, and Hermione did the same for her. When they were sufficiently coated in the substance, which left a somewhat oily feeling on her skin but at least didn't have a noticeable odor, Rigel packed the items in her bag. Crumb was the first of the other champions to arrive. He was dressed in shorts and a fitted, sleeveless top that showed off his fitness. He gave them a suspicious look, but began stretching near the fire without comment. Tianshang arrived soon after, devoid of her usual makeup, with her hair secure in a simple bun at the back of her head. She wore leggings with a long tunic adorned with an animalistic mask in embroidered silk on the back. Crumb paused in his warm-up to remark, the Dao Tai, yes. Tian blinked at him in surprise. It is. Symbols are important. She gestured to Rigel's Hogwarts jersey and the Bulgarian flag on the pocket of Crumb's shorts. Tariel came jogging across the lawn in a set of warm-looking sweats, his usual cheerful expression undauntedly in place. Good night for a walk in the woods, he said, gesturing to the full moon above their heads. Hermione murmured a few words of polite agreement, but in truth none of the others seemed much in the mood for conversation. Antiope arrived next, wielding a sword as long as her arm. At the incredulous stares she received from Hermione and Tariel, she grunted. What? He said we could bring anything. She, too, wore gauntlets, though hers jutted out beyond her elbows in sharp points. Besides Rigel, she was the only other one who'd chosen boots over trainers. Can I hold it? Tariel asked, looking awed at the redhead's weapon. Please, Antiope. Antiope frowned. No. But you may touch it while I hold it. The Somali boy happily did so, running a careful finger along the gleaming blade. So many etchings. What do they mean? Most of them are runes for protection, strength, and durability, Antiope said shortly. While they were talking, Souza, Owens, and Delacour all joined them around the fire. Fleur and Jacob greeted the assembled, but Matthews was quiet. The Brazilian contestant wore denim trousers with a sweatshirt and seemed less than his normal suave self. He stared somewhat listlessly into the fire while swaying ever so slightly in the breeze. Owens, at least, appeared ready for the first task. His expression was absolutely set, and none of the worry or nervousness that shone on other faces reflected in his. With a set of Ilvermorny shorts and a long-sleeve shirt, he looked confident and collected. When he caught Rigel studying him, he winked. Fleur, resplendent in a deep blue tracksuit, made her way closer to the fence where Rigel and Hermione were standing. I saw you two whispering at Zeddy Feast, she remarked, hauntingly beautiful eyes glancing between them. You must have a plan, no? Could be, Rigel said, giving nothing away with her expression. Hard to make plans when we don't know what the task really is yet, though, don't you think? Oh, I do. Now you understand Zeddy curiosity I feel. Her eyes were definitely suspicious. She thought Rigel and Hermione might know something she didn't. Well, she was right, but Rigel was under no obligation to tell her so. I understand, Rigel assured the girl. Unfortunately, we don't know the specifics of the task any more than you do. Hermione was only asking me about the creatures in the forest. Since I have the home pitch advantage, it's only fair I share what I know. Share, Zenfleur invited her, smiling mockingly. Her ponytail fell across her shoulders as she tilted her head to show she was listening. Rigel shrugged. I'm sure by now everyone knows. There are centaurs, thestrals, spiders, snakes, and unicorns in the forest here. I think the real challenge will be whatever the organizers have added to the forest since they put those wards up. I tried to fly over them, Crumb put in unexpectedly. There was no opening. The wards extend over the trees. I suspect something with wings. Very likely, Hermione agreed, nodding her head slowly as though this fact was new to her. Excellent deduction, Mr. Crumb. Crumb raised his eyebrows at the praise. Thank you, Hermione. Just Victor, please. Should we really be on a first-name basis? Antiope broke in. We might have to fight to the death in there. Rigel couldn't tell if she was joking. Just in case, she said, I think the other competitors are the least of our concern tonight. If I know Riddle, he'll have several very nasty surprises in there. Focusing on anything but the creatures we face could have grave consequences. Very true, Mr. Black. Riddle had arrived. He gestured for the 9 competitors to gather around him and produced a delicate cloth bag from his robe sleeve. I trust you have all made the appropriate preparations for tonight. It is time to reveal exactly what your task entails. He reached into the sack and withdrew a stack of parchment. With deft motions he began to hand them out to each of the champions. Rigel was careful not to let his skin touch hers as she accepted her piece of parchment. Looking down at it, she blinked. It looked like one half of a teacher tracker pairing. Just a blank piece of parchment with concentric rings demarking relative distance to the center point. Off toward the forest, a single dot sat motionless on the outermost ring. Those dots represent the prize you will be seeking. While all 9 items are collocated, you will know which one is yours when you reach it. You must see to it that your item exits the forest before the sun rises. Taking the item of another champion who has already retrieved his or hers will not afford you points. Riddle glanced around to ensure they heeded his words. Flip your papers over and you will notice a randomly assigned number. That is your starting position. When you see green sparks fly high above this cottage, the wards around the competition zone will lower for 3 seconds. How will we get back out, then? Hermione asked. Riddle's eyes flickered toward the girl. With an empty smile, he said, if you reach the forest edge and send up green sparks, the wards will be lowered for you to cross. Hermione nodded, fingering her piece of parchment with worrying hands. Thank you, sir. Rigel caught a glimpse of Hermione's number as the parchment twisted in the light. She was number 2. Rigel had 5, which she deduced meant she was to start in the middle. Somehow, starting with the easiest position didn't give her confidence in the supposed randomness of the number allocation. The politician was still explaining, so she put her thoughts on the back burner. These headbands are to be worn at all times while you are in the forest. He began drawing colored bands from his bag and distributed those as well. As we speak, the spectators are gathered in the expanded Quidditch pitch. There, 9 great mirrors have been erected to display the happenings of this task to the audience. Each of your bands is color coordinated to match the corresponding mirror that displays your field of view. I warn you, once the inside bands are touching your skin, they activate, and anything you look at from that point on, the spectators see as well. I'm sure I don't have to iterate plainly what activities you shouldn't broadcast. With varying grimaces and trepidatious expressions of discomfort, they all nodded. Does sound transmit as well? Owens asked, eyeing his yellow band with interest. It does, but in order to lessen the burden on the viewers, only one headband's sound is amplified in the stadium at any given time. Riddle handed Rigel her band last. She inspected it carefully, noting the small inset stones and intricate rune derivations running like ants along the outside of it. The material stretched comfortably in her hand. You have your instructions, champions, Riddle said. A house elf will escort you to your starting position in 5 minutes. In case of emergency, send up red sparks. Otherwise, I'll see you at the finish line. He left them to their thoughts. Many of the contestants began inspecting their parchments for more clues, but Rigel didn't bother. She was pretty sure they had just put a teacher tracker on the items they were to retrieve. They would have a beacon to guide them through the forest, but no terrain map of any kind to make it easier. She stepped close to Hermione, and when no one was looking their way, she swapped their parchments quickly. Hermione frowned at her. I don't think we're allowed to switch, the brown-eyed girl murmured. Each parchment probably leads to one item. They are collocated, Rigel said. It's better if you start in the middle and I cut my way diagonally across the forest toward you. This way, you can just move straight ahead toward the items until I find you. Hermione frowned. I don't mean to take the easy end of our bargain. I don't mind the run, Rigel promised. She felt a slight warming under her skin. The vow wasn't outright forbidding her course of action, but she walked a thin line in trading a good starting spot for an easier time meeting up with Hermione, whose skills she felt would definitely increase her chances of success. The heat settled, and she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. There was some subjectivity to the vow, then. Good. Suddenly, the house elves were there and there was no more time to plan. Rigel showed her elf the number 2 piece of parchment and she was led quite a ways along the tree line before coming to a stop on a little patch of grass that glowed in the moonlight. Fleur, who had the number 1 parchment, gave her an unreadable look as she passed. There was enough room between each contestant that Rigel could see neither Fleur nor Crumb, who had number 3, by the time she fished her cloak from her bag and put it on over her jersey. She took the time to coat her cloak with fire-free as well, but eventually the moment came to don her headband, which was emerald green. She fit it carefully against her forehead, making sure not to catch her emergency earpiece as she slid it into a comfortable place. Once it was on, she was careful not to move her head too much. She looked straight ahead into the trees. She kept her breathing light and even, just in case they happened to be transmitting her sound over on the pitch. Rigel briefly entertained the idea of inspecting her fingernails cheekily. She squelched it, though. It was not the time for frivolity. When the sparks finally came, it was almost anticlimactic. Just a flash of green light in the distance and the barrier before her dropped away. She stepped over the boundary and stopped. She was sure by now the other champions were running, but Rigel needed to listen, first. The sound she needed to hear didn't keep her waiting long. Speaker, you have come as promised. Tree Schleider, she hissed, crouching down to the snake's level. Are you prepared for a long night ahead? Yes. I have scooted tirelessly for the speaker. Tree Slider wriggled closer and lifted his head up in anticipation. I will steer you true. I put my faith in you, Rigel said. She extended her arm to help the green snake coil up it until he was comfortably wrapped around her left bicep, his head near her neck so she could hear him better. Hold on tight. She held the parchment map in one hand and her wand in the other. The moonlight just managed to penetrate through the forest canopy and illuminate the dot that was her eventual destination. Sighting a path between it and what she judged to be Hermione's starting point, she began to run. Tree Slider immediately began a litany of tiny instructions, correcting her left, right again, and once even bidding her to climb through a particularly dense patch of brush. The routes he insisted she take were not those that would seem appealing to a human. Most of the time she was off any semblance of a path. Still, she listened and she stepped wherever he told her. This was his home, not hers, and she didn't doubt the paths would be the easiest places for both large creatures to roam and traps to be set. At one point, when she stopped to let Tree Slider sniff the air with his tongue, she heard a noise somewhere behind them. She focused her attention on her rudimentary magic sensitivity and realized someone was following them, moving steadily through the forest on the trail she'd just blazed with Tree Slider. It had to be Delacour, she supposed, since she was the only champion further up than Rigel on their side. She decided to ignore the girl for now. If she knew where she was, Fleur couldn't sneak up on her. Really, it was smart for Delacour to try following Rigel, if she assumed Rigel knew where she was going. It's not as though her trail through the forest was hard to miss, strewn with bent branches and trampled brush as it was. Tree Slider had scented a pack of Thestrals, but wasn't concerned by them. Rigel began to run again, zigzagging this way and that along a path that would look ludicrous if anyone mapped it. Still, she'd made good progress without coming across anything more dangerous than a Boutruckle, so she mentally promised Tree Slider 100 fat mice and kept to his instructions. "There is a trap up ahead," Tree Slider hissed in her ear. She slowed. "Shifts and that draws you in. We must cross, but keep to the fallen trees." Rigel nodded her understanding and moved forward at a more cautious rate. It was hard to see in the moonlight, particularly as she'd decided to forego the night vision brew in deference to the possibility of being blinded by an unexpected light, but there was a noticeable difference when the soil gave way to unnatural silt. The quicksand was likely something the tournament organizers had fashioned. She followed Tree Slider's instructions and jumped up onto a large log. Carefully balancing, Rigel moved swiftly from one such log to another, ever aware that with a misstep, quagmire awaited her on either side. At an unexpected noise she paused, listening hard. It was coming from the quicksand. She peered through the darkness and risked calling up a light and brandishing her wand toward the source. It sounded like cursing. Slavic cursing, she realized. It was Crumb, both legs sunk into the quicksand at the thigh. He squinted back at her through the light and cursed again. Well, she couldn't stay too long with the vow already egging her feet on, but it cost her nothing to conjure a rope and banish it in his direction. He was a strong guy. He could fix it to something with a sticking charm and pull himself out. Rigel was approaching the vector that Hermione ought to be traveling along, so she projected her sensitivity until it was stretched thin to find the girl. To the right, she told the snake. Tree Slider hissed unhappily. "Spiders that way. Faster, speaker." Hermione wasn't moving very fast, and Rigel didn't doubt she was worried about their paths missing one another. It was a matter of minutes until Rigel closed in on her location. Hermione's magic was the brightest and warmest against her senses in the area, but as she grew closer and allowed her sensitivity perception to shrink again, she noticed another, much fainter trace of magic right above her. Hermione was not alone. Rigel barreled into the clearing just as the spider began to descend. "Accio, Hermione!" The girl flew off her feet toward Rigel with an indignant yelp. The spider hit the ground and scuttled angrily around to fix its many eyes on them. Hermione rolled upright and stared at it. "Mother of God," she whispered. Then she shot a stunner toward its hairy belly. The red light fizzled harmlessly against the acromantula, and both girls darted backwards away from it as it reared in annoyance. "The legs," Hermione, Rigel reminded her. "Tie them on the left side. Now." Rigel snapped out an impedimenta just as Hermione mustered an incarcerus. The acromantula didn't stop, but it slowed just enough for Hermione's spell to wrap two of its legs together on one side. It stumbled. Rigel followed with a second incarcerus and down went the other two legs on that same side. Now, when it tried to scuttle toward them, it only managed to turn in a circle. Already the spider was snapping its fangs in the direction of the rope. It was time to run. She grabbed Hermione's hand and towed her along until the girl's feet caught up with her mind and she was running alongside her. Tree Slider's instructions took them off the path immediately and they fought their way through a thick tangle of bramble until the snake said it was safe to stop. Hermione bent double, gasping for air. You weren't kidding about the size of those things. That's got to be the biggest spider on Earth. I think the head of the family is a lot bigger, she said, pulling out water and gulping for a second before adding, and Hagrid says that one can talk. Hermione shuddered. No thank you, she muttered. She sucked down some of her own water before straightening. All right. You found me, good. How far are we from the items? Rigel checked the parchment. Another half-mile, it looks like. We're making good time. I didn't run into much before the acromantula, Hermione commented. Did you? Just some quicksand over toward where Crumb started out. Tree Slider here is keeping me out of trouble. Rigel gestured to the snake, which Hermione seemed to notice for the first time judging by her widening eyes. Right. Harry did say you speak to snakes. That's useful. She tightened her ponytail. Ready, then. I'm recovered. Me too. Let's go. They traveled helter-skelter through the forest, and Hermione, to her credit, didn't complain or hesitate when Rigel relayed Tree Slider's navigational instructions in a low, constant stream. At one point they slowed from the jog they'd been maintaining and Rigel listened carefully to what Tree Slider was telling her. We have to go through Centaur territory to get to the items, she told Hermione quietly. If they catch us, it could be bad. Could be. Hermione said hopefully. Depends on their mood, Rigel admitted. Sometimes they let kids go, sometimes not. Since they are already incensed at being trapped in this part of the forest and cut off from the rest of their territory, I say we don't risk it. Hermione looked indignant, and it took a second for Rigel to realize it was on the Centaur's behalf. What an awful thing to do to sentient creatures, she said. They moved forward at a slower pace, listening for disturbances and making as little noise as possible. Rigel pushed her sensitivity out as far as she could, and once or twice she picked up individual sparks of magic across her senses, likely scouts, Tree Slider told her. The main herd, or however many of them had been trapped in the wards, at least, wasn't within her sensing range. The two girls were crouched low behind a ridge of underbrush as one of the Centaur scouts passed dangerously close when a rune spore shot out from a burrow beside them and made to take Rigel by surprise. Don't you dare! Tree Slider snapped his head toward the attacking rune spore, making it abort the movement mid-lunge. No one touches the speaker. The rune spore coiled in on itself, all three heads swiveling to look at Tree Slider and Rigel. A speaker. Is it true? The left head asked. It can't be, another head argued. How us, speaker, the last head insisted. Rigel grimaced. The Centaur scout was coming closer in her awareness. They couldn't afford to make so much noise. Very, very softly she said, I am a speaker. The three heads all moaned their apologies and begged forgiveness. I will forgive and forget this matter, if you distract that Centaur over the ridge. In recompense for attacking me, you shall not bite any human this night. She wasn't honestly sure the snakes would go for that, since they didn't know her or have any reason to be loyal to her, but figured it was worth a shot. To her relief, the rune spore hissed in pleased acceptance and darted away toward the looming presence of the Centaur scout. When the two sparks collided in her awareness, Rigel led Hermione quietly away from the scene. Did you just make that snake do your bidding? Hermione asked tentatively. She didn't sound approving. I just asked nicely, Rigel said, smiling innocently. Snakes are very kind and helpful creatures, you know. Possibly the most altruistic of all animals. She thought the Slytherins watching their progress on the mirrors might appreciate the joke, if either her or Hermione's sound was being broadcast. Once out of Centaur territory, they made it another quarter-mile in a handful of minutes. They were so close to the dot on the map, now. Just a little further. A wordless hiss of warning had Rigel stopping immediately in place, hauling Hermione to a halt beside her. As soon as they stopped moving, she heard it, a crashing wave of disruption headed straight toward them. They dove behind a large tree trunk and froze as the sound approached. Something immense tore through the canopy and into the clearing they'd just been jogging through. A bellowing roar filled their ears and a stench, so awful it could only belong to one creature, invaded their nostrils. "Troll," Hermione mouthed at her in the darkness. Rigel nodded. Hermione raised her wand and tapped herself on the head. She disappeared before Rigel's eyes, and Rigel grinned. Gesturing to her own head, she silently asked Hermione to do her as well. She felt a shiver like egg yolk going down her spine, and when she looked down she was a mere shimmer in the night. On silenced feet, they crept around the trunk to peer at the troll. The big, ugly creature sat mournfully in the middle of the clearing, clutching its club in one hand and its head in the other. Blood ran steadily from a gash across its temple. Someone had already had a run-in with this big guy. It bellowed in pain and frustration as it prodded the gash again, and Rigel almost felt sorry for it. Hermione tugged her wrist and Rigel tried to follow her around the clearing without being able to see her. It helped that she could sense the girl's general location with her magic. They made it halfway around the clearing before the troll jerked its head around and sniffed the air in their general direction. They stilled. Great globs of drool dripped from the troll's clunky, uneven teeth, and it rose unsteadily and began lumbering toward them. The girls ran, darting around trees and foliage, even as the troll roared its displeasure and bounded after its invisible prey. Rigel spotted a hollowed-out root system and tugged Hermione toward it. "Down here," she panted. There were numerous accidental elbows and knees caught in soft places as the two of them tried to simultaneously squeeze under the arching roots and into the hollow left by the soil below. Somehow, they managed it before the troll came lumbering into sight. It stood there, gaping around itself, sniffing at the air in annoyance. The troll seemed to have no idea what to do next. She gathered it wasn't much of a hunter, really. In the meantime, they were effectively trapped. The soil beneath them was damp, and the entire enclosure smelled of rot. The sensation forced its way into her head, spreading like a damp fog despite her best attempt to clear her thoughts and calm her heart. The darkness seemed to close in around her. She knew Hermione was next to her, but she couldn't see her. It just felt like a body crammed into the space beside her, and rot rose up in a wave to envelop her in memories and panicked anxiety. "Rigel," Hermione whispered, nudging her in the arm. Tree Slider hissed where she brushed against his scales. The sounds, the movement, called her back somewhat, and she realized she was breathing too fast, and shaking. "What is it?" Rigel shuddered. "I need my bag." The words were scarcely more than a sigh. The troll was still there, still shuffling in a dumb circle just outside their hollow. Rigel struggled to focus her mind, but it was like trying to hold burning sand in her hands. She flinched away, the sand slipped out, and she was only vaguely aware of Hermione's hands probing slowly through her pockets. "It's here, but I can't selectively disillusion it," Hermione whispered. Rigel put all her attention on the words. Those words. Their meaning. Right, her bag was as invisible as she was. That's how a disillusionment charm worked. Hermione wouldn't be able to see what was in it. "Put it in my hand," Rigel mumbled on numb lips. Her heart rate was still climbing, and she could feel her breath getting shorter and faster still. When her bag was pressed into her palm, though, something in her relaxed marginally. Some deep fear was relieved just by the knowledge that her bag and everything in it was already in her hand. She shifted sideways slowly and gave Hermione room to enlarge it. She couldn't focus her magic properly to do it herself, but somehow Hermione knew that. It was a matter of moments to feel her way around the internal pockets and close her fist around the vial she needed. She withdrew the invisible potion within and uncorked it with a slight snick. Rigel tossed the whole thing back, then reached into her bag and drew out another. She drank that one too, and with the second dose came a rush of pure, numb tranquility that almost brought tears to her eyes. Thank Merlin for calming drafts. Her mind cleared quickly, shoving her back into the situation at hand. She and Hermione were still stuck in a root hollow, there was still a troll prowling the clearing that was their only exit, and now she had some fast explaining to do. "Sorry," she breathed. She quickly packed the empty vials away and closed her bag. She didn't re-shrink it, though. "I don't like small spaces. I'm fine now. How's your inanimate to animate transfiguration?" "My, oh." Hermione whisper shouted. "You want to try to fool it? It does look remarkably thick." "I've got it." She couldn't see what Hermione was doing, but she saw when a fallen branch picked itself off the ground and twisted itself into a small deer. The magic-made creature was unsteady on its feet, but remarkably lifelike in the poor light. It stumbled into the clearing proper, alerting the troll to its presence. Under Hermione's direction, the deer jerked itself into a mad dash through the brush on the troll's other side. With an excited bellow, the troll sprinted after it. Hermione and Rigel immediately clambered out of the hollow and Hermione cancelled their disillusionment. Rigel dusted a few cobwebs from her hair and pretended not to notice Hermione's critical gaze. She was fine. A little bit too fine, as she'd overdone the calming draught while brewing again, but nevertheless fine. She checked the map, looked Tree Slider over for injuries, and said, "Good transfiguration, Hermione." Hermione sighed, but smiled grimly. "It won't last 5 minutes. Better get a move on." They had been so close when the troll waylaid them, and they found themselves nearly on top of their map dots in just a few short minutes of running. The clearing the girls emerged into was vast, artificially so. There were still discolored patches of soil where the trees had recently been ripped out, and in the center of the clearing, between them and a raised dais with a golden chest, crouched a sphinx. They approached with caution, wands out. The sphinx looked nothing like the ones in her mindscape, she realized. Dom had created beings more beautiful than terrifying, but this sphinx was a creature of death. Her nails gleamed in the moonlight, which shone unobstructed down into the enormous clearing. The sphinx sprang up from her crouch and prowled menacingly toward them. Rigel cleared her throat. "We've come for what's in the chest," she said clearly. "Do you guard it?" "I do." It was a woman's voice that came from the sphinx's throat, but it carried a lioness's growling undertone. "Will you let us pass?" "I won't." The sphinx smiled, a mouthful of pointy teeth at them. "Unless you answer my riddle." "Just one riddle for two of us," Hermione clarified sharply. Her voice was high with nerves, but she stood tall beside Rigel, her chin out. The sphinx raked the ground with its claws lazily. "Your choice. If you choose one riddle and get it wrong, you both die. If you choose two riddles, better odds of at least one surviving." "We'll take the one riddle," Rigel said immediately. Hermione's eyes shot to her with a gasp. "Don't you want to think about it?" the girl demanded. "I'm pants at word games," she admitted. "Whatever answer you give, I'll take my chances with it." "I trust you." Hermione growled under her breath something that sounded like, "Foolhardy boys." She squared her shoulders and faced the sphinx, though. "Very well. We will answer one riddle together. What is always old and sometimes new, never sad, sometimes blue, never empty, sometimes full, never pushes, always pulls?" The sphinx, having finished her recitation, sat back on her haunches and watched them with bright yellow eyes. Hermione's brow furrowed in fierce thought. "May we discuss?" "I won't stop you." Hermione turned to Rigel, who could only shrug. "It doesn't sound like anything real to me," she admitted. "I've never been good at cryptic stuff. I tried to work out a prophecy last year, and to say it went horribly wrong is a big understatement." "That's fine, I just think better out loud," Hermione said dismissively. "Not sad but blue means it's sometimes blue in color. Never empty and always old make me think it's the ocean, but the ocean isn't normally defined as full and it's always blue. Push and pull, an ocean pulls in the sense of the tide, the tide. The moon." Rigel blinked. "The moon does cause the tides," she agreed. "The answer is the moon," Hermione said. She turned back to the sphinx and positively smirked at her. "Right." The sphinx smirked back. "Correct, little girl." The creatures yawned wide, reminded them of her generosity in not eating them alive, and said, "My supper shall wait a little longer. You may pass." Rigel beamed at her. "Brilliant, Hermione. I would have spent ages working that out." She and Hermione rushed up the steps to large, gilded chest on the dais. It was obvious at first glance the chest was locked. "More riddles," she muttered. "It's covered in runes," Hermione said, bending down to inspect the chest on all sides without touching it. "There's Greek, Egyptian, Chinese, Mayan, Celtic, Viking, and more scripts I don't even recognize. Sanskrit maybe. I think all the runes say the same thing, though." Rigel peered at the lines of runes. Hermione was right. There were 3 runes in each script. Caunus, Lugus, Higalus. Huo, Shui, Feng. What does it mean, though? Fire, water, air, do we filling in the missing element? There's no place to do so, Hermione said. She scanned her eyes over the chest again and pointed to the lock. There are 3 distinct mechanisms. 1 spell for each lock. Fire. Water. Air. Rigel grinned. That's easy enough. Any order? Start with fire, Hermione suggested. Rigel cast Confringo at the lock. A line of fire marked the lock, but otherwise it didn't change. She frowned. Maybe something more aggressive. She tried Incendio without luck. Hermione conjured a blue flame on the tip of her wand and held it to the lock. Nothing. They both deflated, looking back over the script again. The Egyptian runes caught her eye and she said, somewhat uncertainly, that rune doesn't just mean fire. It means lamp, right? Hermione's eyes widened. That's why there's so many scripts. Different interpretations might result in wrong answers. You have to aggregate the different translations to really know what to try. Here, see. The Celtic rune is also the one for sun. The answer isn't fire, it's light. Lumos. Rigel's illuminated wand hovered over the lock for a breathless moment, and then the mechanism clicked open. Thanks, Orlaser. What next? All the scripts I can read look like water to me. Maybe this one is simple. Aguamenti. Hermione let the water spill over the chest and the second lock clicked. Yes. Now air. That's tricky. We could levitate it. Or a drying spell. The Chinese rune for air is supposed to be this, Rigel said, sketching a different symbol to the one of the chest in the grime on the dais. This one on the chest is something else. Wind. Hermione grinned. She shot a Ventus and the third lock popped free. They opened the chest wide to reveal a pile of brightly colored sashes. Rigel grimaced. I guess the ones matching our headbands are ours. All this way for a fancy ribbon. She hoped Riddle heard that one loud and clear. They each grabbed the sashes corresponding to their colors, green for Rigel and light blue for Hermione, and tied them securely around their waists. Just as they closed the lid once more, they heard the Sphinx growl from behind them. Fleur had stepped into the clearing, looking just a little rumpled as she stopped and warily stared at the Sphinx. You have to answer its riddle, Rigel called helpfully. She and Hermione climbed down and waved on their way back across the clearing. Good luck. Hermione added, looking cheerful now that they had accomplished at least half of their goal. She turned to Rigel and Tree Slider. What's the fastest path out of this place? Rigel grinned. After you, milady. They started with a point me charm on the gamekeeper's cabin, since their maps were essentially useless now that they carried the thing they had been tracking on their person. Rigel conveyed their general desired direction to Tree Slider, who was to take up the navigation once more. She really was going to bring the snake a whole basket of mice the next time she came to visit. The snake was uneasy, however. He quivered slightly against her skin and his tongue continually scented the air. She stopped walking, and Hermione paused as well. What is it? She asked, broadening her sensitivity once more. Smithing comes. Smithing knew, the snake hissed. Rigel focused her awareness. There was something big up ahead of them, but it didn't seem to be moving anywhere. Then she felt it, a dense, fast dot of magic heading straight for them. It would be on them in moments. Hermione, get behind me. The other girl moved without hesitation, brandishing her wand in the same direction as Rigel's. What is? There was no time to answer and she threw up a fortis shield an instant before something sprang from the forest and barreled into it. A growling yelp, and the creature, a wolf, rolled off the shield and regained its feet with a spry twist. The wolf paused to bare its teeth at her and she realized with a start that it was a werewolf. What are they playing at? Hermione moaned. A werewolf. Of all the irresponsible insanity. He'll be on Wolfspan, I don't doubt, Rigel said soothingly. They wouldn't let a feral werewolf into the competition zone. That was a recipe for disaster. Then again, he certainly wasn't on the new wolfspan, or he would be a lot less alert and aggressive. So it's okay if it bites us on purpose. Hermione's voice was rising again. He's a person, remember, Rigel said firmly. I don't think he'll bite us. Just run us around and scare us, probably. The wolf leapt again, but Rigel redoubled the magic she had in the fortis shield and it held firm, though she was pushed backwards several feet, taking Hermione and the shield itself with her. The werewolf prowled the forest on the other side of the shield, watching. Waiting. It knows I can't hold this shield all night, Rigel muttered. She glanced back at Hermione. Think you can pull off another free transfiguration? What would scare off a werewolf? Hermione asked, huffing out a laugh that was only slightly hysterical. Nothing on earth, Rigel admitted. But we can tempt it with better prey. A deer. Hermione clarified. She shook her head. Won't trump a human. Can you do a unicorn? But that's barbaric, Hermione protested. Killing unicorns, even pretend ones. The werewolf is drawn to innocence, Rigel said flatly. Can't get better prey than a unicorn. Even on wolfspan it'll be hard for him to resist chasing after it. It was one of Remus's deepest fears, that he might come across something like a unicorn, something pure, and slay it while under the wolf's sway. Hermione stood behind Rigel so the wolf couldn't see her wand moving and began to transfigure a tangle of brush beyond the wolf's line of sight. As Rigel held the shield, Hermione breathed life into the fledgling transfiguration, giving it a coat that shone in the moonlight, hooves of glinting silver, and a horn that glowed with its own iridescence. The unicorn was too graceful, even for an actual unicorn. It had an unearthly feel as it moved, and Rigel guessed that Hermione had never seen a real live unicorn, but seen an image or perhaps a moving photograph. When it was ready, Hermione nudged Rigel's back and she prepared to take advantage of the distraction. The unicorn galloped into the clearing, rearing at the wolf and turning on its hooves to dance away again with a remarkably realistic whinny. The wolf snarled after it, snapping its jaws almost involuntarily. It took several steps toward the transfigured unicorn, but then stopped, shaking its head sharply. It began to circle back toward Rigel, but Hermione made the unicorn dance just out of reach along the edge of the small clearing. It flashed its horn at the wolf, as though giving a dare. The wolf threw back its head and howled in fury, and Rigel's left hand slipped into her bag and pulled out a protection potion in one smooth move. She hid the potion bottle in her sleeve and splashed a quick line across the ground inside her shield. Then she began slowly stepping sideways, Hermione with her, moving the shield bit by bit in a semicircle around the clearing, pouring potion whenever the wolf's attention was distracted by the transfiguration. The animal seemed completely torn between chasing the unicorn and remaining to stalk the girls, which led Rigel to think he probably was on wolfspan, or else his mind would be completely given over to the wolf's urges. The wolf batted at the unicorn in frustration whenever it came near, but didn't follow it out of the clearing. It snapped at the transfiguration, then turned back to regard Rigel and Hermione with menacing eyes, then swiped again at the unicorn, and back to them. This continued even as Rigel slowly reversed their positions in the clearing. Her circle was almost complete. Thanks to her encounter with Remus the previous year, she knew exactly how to trap a werewolf for the night. The trickiest part would be closing it. For the ward to spring up into place, she'd have to lower her shield for a split second. She timed it carefully, waiting for the wolf to overextend in its battle with the imaginary unicorn. As it lunged forward toward the transfiguration at last, Rigel took the opening. She dropped the shield and closed the circle, but the ward didn't materialize. And in that instant, the wolf sprang back toward her with her death in its eyes. Rigel was too slow. Her legs were jellied with surprise and even as she stumbled backwards she knew she wouldn't get the next shield up in time. A flash of green obscured her vision for an instant, coming between her chest and the oncoming teeth. Tree Slider had flung himself forward from Rigel's shoulder with a battle hiss. She brought her arms up to shield them both from the onslaught, but she was too slow. The wolf twisted midair, claws flailing, to dislodge the snake from his snout and Tree Slider flew across the clearing, impacted a tree, and lay still. No. Rigel didn't know if she said it in English or Parseltongue. She only knew she was furious. Her magic sprung into her hands with a thought, slamming into the wolf like a physical thing. The canine rolled away from the barrage and came up growling on the other side of the clearing. She knew what she wanted. She wanted the wolf contained. Her wand, almost an afterthought, came up to level at the wolf. Fortis. A shield sprang into life, but not around her or Hermione. It formed around the wolf and contracted, pressing the creature in from all sides. The wolf howled his displeasure and tried to beat himself against the inside of the shield, but it was too small to build up any momentum and the shield only slid sideways in the dirt. Hermione, breathing hard, finally let the complicated unicorn transfiguration drop. "How long can you hold that?" she gasped. "Long enough to finish the protection ward," Rigel said grimly. "Would you mind checking on my snake?" Sure." Hermione crossed to where Tree Slider was crumpled and crouched down to inspect him with a few diagnostics. Rigel kept her wand trained on the enclosed wolf even as she circled the clearing along the line of potion she'd poured, looking for any gaps. There was an area that had been scuffed through with a paw. She narrowed her eyes. Smart wolf. He had only pretended to be preoccupied with the unicorn. The swipes he made in its direction were used to foil her circle. How he knew what it was, she didn't know. But she would finish it, now. She found 3 more places in the dirt that had disturbed the circle and poured a little more potion on each. As she closed the circle for good, she let the Fortis shield fade away. The wolf rushed her, but the protection potion would not be budged. It threw the wolf backwards, and the animal let out a growling snarl. "That will hold until morning," she said tiredly. She turned back to Hermione, who was deep in concentration over the snake. "Is he alive?" Hermione said quickly. "But, badly injured. Unconscious. I'm not that skilled with animals. I can diagnose, but I don't know if I can heal him." "I can," Rigel said, moving forward. "You go on without me." The vow sang in her blood, hot and immediate. No. No, that won't work. I have to keep moving forward." "Okay, you take over navigating us back to the forest edge, Hermione. I'll heal Tree Slider as we go." Hermione frowned. "Just a straight path?" Rigel nodded reluctantly. "We'll just have to hope we don't run into anything." Something ran into the clearing immediately after she spoke and she wanted to groan aloud. It wasn't a creature, however, but Antiope, brandishing a bloody blade, gore streaked down one side of her. She looked a little crazed, but recognition came quickly. "Black Granger. Is that a?" "He's contained," Rigel assured her distractedly. "Item chest is that way." She gestured. "If you'll excuse us." Antiope nodded once and disappeared back into the trees. "I hope she hasn't killed anything sentient," Hermione said lowly. She used the point me spell again and motioned Rigel along. "Just follow me." They were slower going back than they had been in coming through, without Tree Slider to guide their steps unerringly. Hermione went ahead and disillusioned them again when they crept through centaur territory on silent feet. Rigel scarcely noticed. All her attention was on Tree Slider. Brave, loyal Tree Slider who was not going to die. She cradled the snake's limp body in the end of her cloak as she walked, steadily pumping healing energy into his form. There was a lot of internal bleeding, but she was determined to stop every bit of it. After a grueling 10 minutes, Tree Slider was stable, but still unconscious. Rigel tied the ends of the cloak to her belt in a makeshift carrying basket and tried not to jostle him too much even as she and Hermione broke into jogs to make the journey quicker. To avoid the area where the spiders had nearly caught Hermione in the beginning, they veered to the left on their way out of the forest. Just as they made to course correct again, however, something big and fast as lightning dropped down from the forest above them. Rigel and Hermione both leapt to the side, and Hermione screamed high and fast. Rigel looked over and saw a vicious gash on the girl's arm, but her focus couldn't remain on her friend. What dropped at their feet was not another spider, it was the Peruvian viper tooth. -0. DM. -0. Rigel Black was an idiot, and nothing could convince him otherwise after tonight. Draco sat in a stadium box his father had managed to procure and fumed silently at the large oval mirror in the middle of the pitch, the one etched in emerald green. Pansy sat next to him, clutching his hand hard as she had been since Rigel's run-in with the werewolf. A werewolf. Just what was the ministry playing at, he'd like to know. He tried to blank out the girl's furiously dynamic emotions, lest they overwhelm his already fraying nerves. Rigel was finally on his way back. He would be out in no time, and everything would be fine. At least with his snake unconscious, he wasn't speaking Parseltongue every 5 seconds anymore. Half the stadium had gasped or screamed when it first came blaring out of the mirror, and most of them still flinched whenever Rigel's mirror was transmitting the sound. Draco appreciated that his friend wasn't shy about his ability, but did Parseltongue have to be the very first thing he said? Alden and Edmund had sidled into the box with him and Pansy as though he'd invited them, and he was reminded of their presence when Alden muttered, "He needs to drop the bloody snake." "He won't," Edmund murmured back. "He's loyal." "He's an idiot," Draco thought again. There were a million snakes in the forest. Draco was a bit surprised the vow hadn't made him leave the snake behind by now, but he supposed as long as healing the animal didn't slow Rigel down, it wasn't technically impacting what would otherwise be his best effort. Granger's viewer, ringed in light blue and second from the end on the left in the line of mirrors, swiveled around to look at Rigel, and Draco greedily inspected the image. Rigel's face was dirty and sweat-stained, but his eyes were eerily calm as he flicked them between the snake and the path ahead. While Granger seemed vaguely scattered every time Rigel's viewer showed a glimpse of her face, Rigel was collected. He always had worked well under pressure. It annoyed Draco how often Granger's viewer swiveled toward Rigel. She was constantly checking in with him, looking to Rigel for any and every course of action. If he were cynical, and if he didn't know Rigel at all, he'd think that teaming up with the Muggle-born girl had been a masterstroke of public relations. Every time Rigel did something reckless or impressive, the audience got a third-person view from Hermione's mirror. It made his journey through the forest all the more entertaining to watch. Unfortunately, Draco knew that Rigel had teamed up with Granger because he trusted her on the word of his cousin and probably didn't want Potter to be upset with him if the girl died in the tournament under his watch. The sound was making its rounds through the other mirror. Antiope was currently attempting to fight the Sphinx instead of just answering its riddle. The Shang girl had taken out some sort of lute-like instrument and was charming a Snallygaster slowly to sleep. Sousa's mirror was motionless. It had been almost all night, and Draco was trying not to imagine why that was. Perhaps his transmitter had fallen off. Suddenly the sound was back with Rigel, however, and Granger was screaming. Pansy's hand clamped down tighter on his as Rigel's viewer tilted sideways. It was difficult to see what exactly had happened until Rigel stood straight again and the mirror's image swung to reveal Hermione sprawled on the dirt, blood pouring from her wand arm. Crouched beside her in an attack stance was the dragon. No, Draco breathed. He was so close to safety. The Peruvian viper tooth was smaller than most full-grown dragons, but it was fast. It darted toward Granger's prone form, but Rigel's shield was already there, aborting its movements and redirecting its attention toward Rigel himself. The heavy chain that had presumably once bound the dragon in place trailed slowly across the ground as the viper tooth stalked toward Rigel, who, for some reason known only to him, wasn't yet running in the opposite direction. Granger's mirror finally shifted to show something other than blood-soaked earth as the girl roused herself and shook her head sharply. From the girl's mirror, he saw Rigel standing, absolutely fearless, in the face of the dragon's wary approach. "Rigel." Granger's voice echoed through the stadium. She sounded like a person in a great deal of pain. "Run." Rigel ignored the suggestion. "Can you heal yourself?" he asked without looking at her. Granger's viewer dipped down to her arm, or what was left of it. Great, gaping gashes of flesh hung limply where the dragon had raked her. Draco felt sick just looking at it, and from Pansy's choked whimper he wasn't the only one. "I think I'm in shock," Granger admitted. Yes. I can." She picked up her wand with her left hand and cast a numbing charm followed by a blood-clotting charm. The dragon had stopped advancing on Rigel, but an ominous tendril of smoke was leaking from its snout. "It's going to flame," Edmund said lowly. "Come on, Rigel. Shield." He did, thanks or laser. A fortis that was so bright it practically blinded sprung up between Rigel and the dragon just moments before a beam of pure fire shot out of the viper tooth's throat. Rigel's screen went completely white, and only Granger's viewer told them that he hadn't just been roasted alive. Granger could still see the boy behind his shield, unmoved by the onslaught of fire. It was no short burst, the flames went on and on, as though the dragon needn't breathe to sustain them. Rigel was doing something behind the shield. With his free hand he seemed to be fiddling with something in his pocket. Draco didn't know what could be more important than fending off a dragon, but his confusion was answered when Rigel called, "Hermione, muffle your ears and close your eyes." Regardless of whether she did or didn't, they could all still see what was happening through her mirror. Rigel dropped the shield. Pansy screamed into his ear as flame enveloped Rigel completely, but Draco scarcely heard her over his own hoarse cry. But, what, Rigel was still there in Granger's viewer. Standing somehow impervious to the fire, his face screwed into a grimace as he flung something toward the viper tooth and then clamped both hands over his ears. The clearing exploded. Both Rigel and Granger's mirrors went white for an instant and a crack had everyone flinching before the mirror operators cut the sound. But the sound kept coming, only far away and muffled. He realized it was coming from the other contestants' viewers, too. Everyone in the forest was hearing whatever it was, and one by one the mirrors all panned up to the sky above the treetops. Fireworks! Draco spluttered. What on Merlin's green earth was happening? There were dazzling red and yellow firework animals erupting over the forest in every mirror. Lions and dragons and unicorns danced across the sky. He stood from his seat and, yes, he could see them in the distance from the box. Rigel and Granger's mirrors slowly regained intelligibility as the fireworks took on a life of their own and began to separate, swooping around the clearing and shooting up into the air before them. The real dragon was nowhere to be seen. Rigel's viewer moved to focus on Granger, who was stumbling to her feet with tears in her eyes. Draco couldn't hear her over the still exploding fireworks, but he saw her mouth. What the hell was that? In Granger's mirror, Rigel grinned, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Dragon repellent," he mouthed back. Rigel began to assist Granger in patching up her arm, and by the time it looked less like a chew toy the fireworks had almost put themselves out. The sound moved back to Rigel's mirror as he was saying, "Should get moving again, if you can. We've just attracted a lot of attention." "You think?" the girl said through gritted teeth. She had sliced through her sweater at the shoulder and was now using the torn sleeve at a makeshift sling. Rigel handed her a blood replenisher, which she took wordlessly, followed by a pain potion and what Draco thought was an anti-infection draft. "I can't believe we survived that. The burn repellent worked. I thought for a moment you were crazy, Rigel." Rigel smiled tiredly. "Dad told me not to test it, but the fire didn't look like it was pausing anytime soon, and I think it was starting to cook me alive even through the shield." Rigel went momentarily cross-eyes as he looked down at his own nose. "Does this look sunburned to you?" Pansy let out a tremulous laugh. She was still shaking. "Rigel, you idiot," she whispered. Draco was very much inclined to agree. Granger performed a point me and said, "Let's go. I'm done with this forest." "Right behind you," Rigel agreed. The sound moved away to Delacour, who'd managed to get herself cornered by a manticore just shy of the forest's edge. Draco didn't care, he kept his eyes on Rigel's mirror, and as soon as the end of the trees came into view he was out of his seat. Pansy followed him out of the box in silent agreement, and the two of them ran on anxious feet down the stadium stairs and across the lawn. -0. HP. -0. As soon as she was free of that blasted forest, she plucked the headband from her head and dropped it to the ground so it would stop transmitting. As though her aching psyche had summoned them, Draco and Pansy were there at the edge of the forest when she stumbled across the ward line after Hermione. She was in their arms before she has time to greet them. Pansy's form trembled against her like a wild thing. Draco just gripped her hard and a moment later she felt his blissful numbing drink envelope her as well. She relaxed. Just let go of all the tension and fear and control she'd wound tight within herself over that last few hours. Rigel wanted nothing more than to shower and sleep, but she knew the night was only half over. She would not be allowed to leave until all of the champions had made it out of the woods. Still, for a single peaceful minute, she allowed herself the comfort of her friend's embrace. When her friends finally let her go, Rigel noticed Hermione standing awkwardly to one side, looking wistful. She reached out toward the girl and shook her uninjured hand. "Well done in there, tonight. Thanks for your help. Me. Hermione laughed a little helplessly. Rigel, you're the only reason I'm not spider food right now. Or dragon fodder. It was so much more than I was expecting. The girl looked completely overwhelmed. Rigel had to agree, though. The first task was way over the top, even for Riddle. Rigel nodded toward Hagrid's cabin, where a tent had been set up. I think Madame Pomfrey is in there. She'll check over your arm. Hermione nodded. The adrenaline was wearing off and the reality of the last few hours settling in over her. Rigel knew from experience the best thing for her to do now was sit somewhere quiet and let a professional take care of her injuries. Hermione walked numbly toward the medic tent and Rigel turned back to her friends. So, did I win? You prat. Draco swore. Do you have any idea how worried we've been all night? Watching you go from reckless to impossible to somehow even more reckless for hours. Imagine how I felt, Rigel said dryly. Rigel, it was awful, Pansy said, earnest. I wish you'd never agreed to do this. It's a miracle no one's died yet. Miss Granger is not the only one to have been nearly mauled, from what we saw. How are the others doing? Rigel asked, serious. She didn't want to see anyone seriously hurt or killed that night. Owens and Crumb finished ahead of you, Draco said. Fleur is close, but ran into some trouble at the last minute. Other than that, we've seen Antiope, Chang, and Tariel all make it at least as far as the Sphinx. Sousa, hard to say. His transmitter fell off. The mirror went dark. Rigel clarified. No, just stopped moving, Draco said. Rigel frowned. As long as it's in skin contact it will transmit, but if it fell off it would have gone dark. It sounds like he's been badly injured. She glanced back toward the trees, grimacing. Maybe I should. No. Draco and Pansy both snapped the word at her. You aren't going back in there. You have to rest, Rigel. Still, what if he was alone and vulnerable in there? Someone had to do something. Draco heaved a long-suffering sigh. The tournament organizers know how the mirrors work as well as you, he pointed out. If Sousa is in that sort of trouble, I'm sure they're already handling the situation. Rigel nodded slowly. That made sense. Her friends attempted to herd her toward the medical tent, but she spotted Sirius jogging across the lawn toward her. He scooped her up and spun her in a circle, the way he'd done with Archie when he was a kid. Thank Godric, kid. He stopped spinning and squeezed her so tight she thought she might break a rib. Who taught you to be so reckless, anyway? I'm okay, Dad. Watch my snake, please. His grip loosened and she murmured into his chest, really? I'm all right, I promise. Everything is fine. Sirius sighed and pulled back to look into her face worriedly. You were fantastic, Arch. I'm so proud of you. But that situation was out of order. If Riddle thinks he can try and kill my own kid right in front of me, he's got another thing coming. I'm sure it was more controlled than it seemed, Rigel said, not really believing it. She added, the werewolf was a bit much, though. I mean, it dehumanizes the entire community to put one in the mix with creatures like Acromantula and Quintapids. Just another monster in the dark. Sirius grimaced. You're right, pup. I hope it's no one Remus knows. No self-respecting werewolf should have stooped to participating in this madness. Green sparks popped in the sky just then, and Fleur came limping out of the forest when the wards dropped down. They popped back up just as quickly, and Rigel couldn't help but be impressed. It took a lot of power to lower and raise wards so fast. She thought it was unlikely Regulus could have done it alone. The French girl gasped for air, spitting out curses left and right. That forest is possessed by an evil curse. I hope someone burns it down. Rigel winced. It's not usually that bad, she told the girl. At least she thought she did. Fleur blinked at her and said, you sound like my house elf. Sirius snorted. Have you been taking love language lessons from a house elf, Archie? My goodness, I didn't know you were so hard-pressed. Rigel's ears went pink. Dad. I just hang around the kitchens sometimes, that's all. There's this really nice elf who helps me out a lot and she speaks French, okay. Oh Godric, where have I strayed? Sirius asked the sky. Fleur began to laugh lowly. She seemed surprised at herself. After tonight, I wasn't sure I would laugh again. Rigel understood the feeling. The memory will fade soon enough, she told the girl. There's a medic in the tent over there, if you have any injuries. Fleur nodded, a hand coming up to prod gingerly at her thigh. Her tracksuit was dark with blood. She began to limp toward the tent, but paused and gave Rigel a grateful look. Thank you for letting me follow you. I know you saw me once or twice. She smiled and shrugged. No idea what you're talking about. Draco was scowling when she looked back at him. You let her follow you all the way to the chest. Why? It didn't slow me down any, Rigel reasoned. Plus it's easier to keep an eye on people when they are close by. The fewer people end up in mortal peril this year the better, I say. Pansy rubbed her temple. We are discussing this in your debrief, Rigel. Debrief. Sirius looked between them, bemused. Pansy is my strategist, Rigel said, smiling a little. And Draco is my tactician. Does that make me your armorer? Sirius wondered, grinning. You and the Weasley twins, she agreed. That fire-free stuff was amazing, Dad. I could feel it absorbing the heat before it reached my skin. I might be flash-burned in a couple of places, but I'd say the first real test was a big success. Sirius's grin dropped a little. I'm glad it worked, but it was supposed to be a last resort. That was a last resort, Rigel told him. With Hermione in no state to run, I had no plan other than the firework disc. What was that, anyway? Pansy asked. It was so small compared to the amount of explosive power inside. She shrugged. You'd have to ask the Weasleys. George gave it to me earlier today. I think it was supposed to be a joke, send up fireworks instead of sparks when I finished, you know. But it was dead useful. That dragon certainly scarpered, Sirius agreed, barking out a laugh. I may have to consult these evil geniuses on a project or two. They'd love that, Rigel said. Antiope was the next to leave the forest, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She dropped her sword into the grass and raked both hands through her hair, slowly shaking her head back and forth. She seemed to be muttering to herself with her eyes closed. Then, with a deep breath, she collected the blade, straightened, and strode toward the medic tent with a stoic expression. Tianshang came out shortly after, and while she was rumpled and dirty, she was the first to emerge without a significant amount of blood on her person. She walked over to Rigel's group and asked, the others. All are out. Rigel shook her head. Tariel and Matthews are still in the forest. Shang frowned. We wait now, she determined. The Chinese girl removed her purple headband and put it carefully in her pocket before looking around at the others. I am Shang Tian. Pleased to meet you. It's a pleasure to meet you, too, Pansy said. I am Pansy Parkinson. This is Draco Malfoy and Rigel's father, Lord Black. Shang bowed deeply to Sirius. Is honorable to meet you, Lord Black. Sirius shifted uncomfortably. You as well, Miss Shang. Princess Shang. Or. Shang giggled, but stopped almost at once, flushing pink. I am not princess. My father very far from throne. He is court astrologer. Much honor, but not. She frowned in a frustrated way. How to say a strength to do whatever is wanted. Power. Pansy guessed. Yes. My family has much honor, little power, Shang concluded. I thank you your kindness, Lord Black. Sirius grimaced, not at all. The wait for Tariel and Matthews was excruciating. Minute after silent minute dragged on, with Rigel growing more worried by the second. She busied herself checking on Tree Slider, but the snake was out of the woods both literally and figuratively. He was in a deep, healing sleep now in Rigel's cloak. Finally, she excused herself for a moment, saying she needed to use the bathroom and making her way toward Hagrid's cabin. When she was out of sight, she rummaged in her bag until she found the Marauder's map and pulled it out. Only part of the forest was actually included on the map, but it was the part closest to the edge, and she was relieved to see two dots, one nearly on top of the other, making slow but steady progress toward the tree line. Relieved, She opted to use Hagrid's facilities while she had the chance and made her way back to her friends a few minutes later, just as green sparks shot into the sky behind them. They saw Tariel first, because he was dragging an unresponsive Matthews behind him. Rigel, Draco, and Sirius rushed forward to relieve the dark-skinned boy of his burden and set Matthews down gently on the grass. Rigel removed his headband and flung it aside, then began her diagnostic charms, but nothing life-threatening or even all that alarming appeared in her scans. He was breathing oddly, but not in a way that sounded as though he had fluid or anything else obstructing his lungs. His heart rate was fast, with no obvious cause. Had he been poisoned? She peeled back his eyelid and startled when it jerked out of her grasp and blinked. Matthews opened both eyes and stared at her, not speaking or otherwise reacting to her presence. "He's awake," she said, unnerved, but not really responsive. "What happened?" she asked Tariel. Tahil was still breathing hard, and he pushed aside his headband to wipe his brow with his sleeve as he said, "Not sure. I found him just lying on the ground, but he didn't look injured. Still, he was in no condition to remain in the forest, so I pulled him along with me." Ftian bent down to inspect the boy and a moo of disapproval pursed her lips. "Beetle chewer. Fool boy." Rigel lifted Matthew's top lip and shook her head. "His teeth aren't stained. I don't think this is beetle." Beetle was a leaf that, when chewed, had some sort of cognitive effect on the mind. She was vaguely aware that some wizards in Southeast Asia treated it the way Westerners treated tobacco. "Not certain beetle," Ftian said. "But like beetle. His eyes, you see." The pupils that stared up at them were blown wide. Lots of things caused dilated pupils, however. He could have a brain injury that just wasn't showing up in her scan. Or maybe he had overdosed on pain potion. But again, her diagnostics told her he wasn't afflicted with any pain-causing wounds. "He looks high as a kite," Sirius said flatly. "Give him a sobering draft." Rigel frowned. "Why would he allow himself to face a task like this while incapacitated?" she asked, even as she fished the potion in question from her kit. "Is he trying to kill himself?" "Can't understand an addict's thinking, if that's what he is," Sirius said, shaking his head. "He's just lucky this young man has a generous spirit." "Good work," he told Tariel. Tariel only sighed. "I am the last to return. Even without helping Matthews, I would be last. I do not think I have done good work tonight." "You saved his life," Sirius disagreed. "That's all that matters." Tariel looked only marginally cheered by this. Rigel had administered the sobering draft and was watching Matthews for signs of improvement when a party of ministry officials arrived from the pitch. Riddle, Fudge, Bagman, and Crouch were all there, along with Dumbledore, the Malfoys, James, and 2 other Aurors. Riddle approached Matthews and peered down at him just as the boy groaned and winced against the harsh effects of the sobering draft. He let off a few choice words in Portuguese, but quieted his curses when he noticed all the people standing over him. He sat up, rubbing at his head. "I trust you are recovered from your fall," Riddle said quietly. Matthew's eyes widened. "Ah yes," he said slowly. "Very recovered. Thank you. Then you may join the rest of us in the champion's tent, where we will announce your scores." Riddle's eyes swept over Rigel, Ftian, and Tariel. "If you would all follow me to the tent and read on your headbands, we can bring this exciting night to a conclusion." He swept away toward the medic tent, and the others followed after him wearily. Rigel turned to Mr. Malfoy before doing the same, and said, "Thank you again for these excellently crafted gauntlets, Lord Malfoy. As you can see, they held remarkably well." She lifted one to display the claw marks that now raked across its surface. "House Malfoy is gratified to be of service," Malfoy said, inclining his head to Sirius and Rigel both. "We're very glad you're safe," Narcissa added. Her face was pale, and Rigel suspected she had not enjoyed the entertainment that evening at all. "Someone will need to let that werewolf out at dawn," she realized suddenly. Rigel rummaged in her bag until she procured the ward disruptor. She handed it to Malfoy Sr. "Please give this to whoever the organizers send." He took it, but said, "I will pass it to Lord Potter, as I understand he is sending a team to collect the wolf presently." "The Aurors are." Sirius stared at Mr. Malfoy with dawning fury. "The werewolf wasn't part of this." "Decidedly not," Malfoy said. An investigation will be launched into how exactly the beast managed to penetrate the wards. Rigel blew out an exasperated breath. The item chest was well outside the Hogwarts wards, she said flatly. Since the competition zone overlapped part of the unwooded forest, all he had to do was wait outside Riddle's wards until they dropped to let us enter, then cross them at the same time. Malfoy stared at her for a long moment before saying, "Very astute, Rigel." "That may be. Rigel," the scoring Draco reminded her. She nodded, and went to collect her headband from where she'd dropped it earlier before continuing toward the tent. It was much bigger inside than it looked. Dumbledore was in one corner conferring with Madame Pomfrey, who wore a ferocious scowl. The 9 competitors stood close together around the group of tournament organizers, in the center of which was Riddle. "Please put on your headbands once more, as this will be broadcast down to the pitch as well," Riddle began. When he had everyone's attention and all their headbands were in place, he smiled. "Well done, all of you. Tonight you have been tested beyond what any of you likely imagined. This was done knowingly. One of the measures of great witches and wizards is their ability to overcome fear and physical hardship and to remain steadfast and true in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds." He moved his head to look at each of the champions in turn as he spoke, except he wasn't looking at them, he was looking into their headbands. Rigel frowned as she realized this was really about Riddle, not them. Right now, every mirror in the pitch would be filled with his face, smiling and self-congratulatory. She deliberately turned her head away from Riddle and toward the others. She let her headband take in Antiope's stony visage, Hermione and Fleur's bandaged limbs, Tariel's exhausted eyes, Crumb's muck-strewn form, and Ftion's troubled frown. Let them see the truth of what has occurred tonight. In her mirror, at least, let them know the cost of their entertainment. Now, to the scoring. Riddle produced a roll of parchment with a flourish. "I'm sure you're all aware that you're to be judged on how quickly you completed the task assigned to you, but what we have not told you is, that is only one of the 4 categories on which you were assessed." He paused for effect, allowing the pure sadism of those words to sink in before continuing. "The 4 categories are, time taken for task completion, valor in the face of danger, critical thinking in problem solving, and moral fiber." There were a few murmurs at the last category, but most the others seemed too tired and strung out to really care. Riddle elaborated. "The tournament judges chose these criteria because they represent virtues the wizarding world would see associated with its best and brightest. You must be effective, creative, tough, and ethical. However, we have not weighted every category equally. Timeliness in finishing the task is worth 20 points. Valor is 15. Appropriate thinking is worth 10 points, and morality, 5 points. Each champion's score, therefore, is out of 50. Rigel wondered at the odd way of scoring. It appeared comprehensive at first, and certainly it was a more in-depth evaluation than she'd been expecting, but it was also off. Riddle agreeing to give points for moral fiber. She began to suspect that the complicated scoring system was merely a screen. Everything about this tournament was designed for a very specific purpose, to ensure a pure-blood champion. In the category of task completion, in order of success, the points are as follows, Riddle said. The tent was utterly silent as everyone listened carefully. Jacob Owens, 20 points. Victor Crumb, 19 points. Archerus Black and Hermione Granger, 18 points. Fleur Delacour, 16 points. Antiope, 15 points. Ftian Shang, 14 points. Tariel Dirk-Zahai, 13 points. Matthew Souza, 0 points. Souza blinked, but didn't argue. He didn't seem to care at all, and Rigel had to wonder if Pansy and Millicent had been right. Maybe there was something odd about his participation in the tournament. For Valor, first place goes to Antiope, 15 points, Riddle said, smiling ever so slightly. Full marks in this category were given for willingness to face every foe encountered. Points were deducted for running or hiding without engaging. Second goes to Archerus Black, 14 points, for being the only champion to take on the most dangerous foe in the forest and win. Next, Victor Crumb, 12 points. Hermione Granger, 10 points. Tariel Dirk-Zahai, 10 points. Ftian Shang, 9 points. Jacob Owens, 8 points. Fleur Delacour, 5 points. Matthew Souza, 0 points. Rigel glanced over at Hermione, a frown tugging at her brow, but the curly-haired girl only shrugged unconcernedly back at her, mouthing the word shield. Rigel grimaced. If she'd known they were going to count Hermione off for it, she might not have shielded her so often. Then again, she probably would have, she admitted. Rigel was not one to take unnecessary chances with other people's safety. In the category of problem solving, full marks are awarded for applying the appropriate response to each situation or problem set. Marks were deducted for inefficient or unwise use of force. Riddle cleared his throat. Jacob Owens, 10 points. Hermione Granger, 9 points. Fleur Delacour, 8 points. Archerus Black, 8 points. Ftian Shang, 8 points. Tariel Dirk-Zahai, 7 points. Victor Crumb, 6 points. Antiope, 5 points. Matthew Souza, 0 points. She wondered with amusement whether the judges had found her use of fireworks against the dragon unwise. Finally, for moral fiber, full marks to Tariel Dirk-Zahai for saving another champion at no benefit to himself, and to Ftian Shang for completing the task without harming a single creature or fellow being. 5 points each. Jacob Owens, 4 points. Archerus Black, 4 points. Hermione Granger, 4 points. Victor Crumb, 2 points. Antiope, 1 point. Fleur Delacour, 1 point. While she did not harm anything excessively, she did use underhand means to complete the task. And Matthew Souza, 0 points. Riddle rolled the scroll and tucked it away. So where does that leave us? Minister, if you would. Fudge stepped forward, his chest thrust out. Thank you, Lord Riddle. Ahem. In 9th place, with 0 points due to failure across all 4 categories, Matthew Souza. In 8th place, Fleur Delacour, with 30 points. In 7th place, Tariel Dirk-Zahai with 35 points. Tied for 5th, we have Ftian Shang and Antiope with 36 points. 4th is Victor Crumb with 39 points. 3rd, Hermione Granger, with 41 points. And our winner, with a total of 44 points, is Archerus Black. Well done, Mr. Black. Jacob Owens, then, is our runner-up with 42 points. A quick thank you to all the sponsors of tonight's events, and a round of applause for our champions, please. No one in the tent applauded, but presumably, down on the pitch, there was some measure of cheering. Rigel found it hard to believe that she'd won the first task, but it was difficult to pin down which category, exactly, she had been scored unfairly in. Somehow, she was certain the scores had been manipulated, but the subjective metrics themselves made it difficult to contest. A few of the others congratulated her on their way out of the tent. She tried to smile politely, but was afraid it came out a grimace. Crumb noticed and grimaced back at her. Strange tournament when I come back second and place 4th, no. He shook his head irritatedly. Still, even knowing the scoring ahead of time, I would not do anything different. There is no path for strategy in such a dangerous situation. Rigel nodded in agreement. Tonight was mostly luck. Some probably had a harder time than others just based on starting position or the creatures they happened to encounter. I think we all did well. I thank you for the rope, Crumb said. He left the tent, and Rigel followed. Hermione sidled up beside her on the way out. You think you didn't deserve to win, but you did, she told her. At Rigel's grimace, Hermione nudged her. I'm serious. No one else took on a werewolf and a dragon. I asked around. The others encountered 1 or 2 creatures each. We ran into 4, not including the Sphinx. I'm not so blind I can't see that you did most of the heavy lifting tonight, either. Don't think I won't return the favor, Rigel. Thanks again. She trotted off toward the castle, still cradling her newly healed arm close. Rigel found James and Sirius waiting for her, along with Pansy and Draco. Father took Mother home, Draco told her, but he said to tell you congratulations for winning. She nodded. I appreciate your family's support. Would you two mind going ahead to the castle without me? I need to talk to my dad and my uncle for a minute. I'll be back in the common room soon, though. Pansy and Draco exchanged a resigned look and both nodded. Pansy hugged her again gently. Congratulations, Rigel. They both began the walk back to the entrance hall. Rigel turned to the older men with a serious face. Did you get the werewolf? She asked James. What was he trying to do here? I'm sure he was on Wolfsbane, so he must have had a purpose. James frowned. I shouldn't tell you. I'm the one in danger if I don't know, she said firmly. Uncle James, if someone is targeting the tournament, it affects all the competitors. Her father sucked in one cheek and chewed on it. He always did that right before giving in. All right. Don't spread this information too far, Archie, but we didn't apprehend the wolf. By the time my team got there, the barrier was gone and the wolf with it. She shook her head. You can't break one from the inside without a wand or the disruptor potion. There's no way it got out on its own. But if one of the other champions let it out, you would have seen on the mirrors. Whoever helped the werewolf free is probably the same one who gave him the information that helped him in Sirius said grimly. That means someone on the organizing committee, Rigel said. We don't know that for certain yet, James cautioned. Just, be careful. You did good tonight, Arch, but there's no knowing what all there is in store for you lot this year. Just keep your head on a swivel and we'll do our best to help out from our end. She smiled. Thanks, Uncle James. I couldn't have done it without you guys. Don't thank us, pup, you're just our little advertisement project, Sirius said archly. Why, every kid in school is going to want some fire-free burn-based now. Rigel tilted her head. I don't know, I think more people will remember the Weasley twins' firework display. Now that was some impressive magic. Sirius laughed. Challenge accepted. Next time we'll give you something to really knock their socks off. She blanched. The Marauders and the Weasley twins trying to outdo one another, now that was a terrifying thought. A yawn clawed its way up her throat and she stifled it on her grime-coated sleeve. Go to bed, kid, Sirius said fondly. Remus will be sorry he missed you, but you're too knackered to stay up till dawn. Rest up, remember to eat well and get your strength back before the next task. We'll see you soon. He hugged her fiercely, and James followed suit soon after. Good work tonight, Archie. I mean it. Not many can take on a werewolf like that and come out unscathed. We think it might have been Greyback, himself, but it was difficult to get positive ID through the mirrors. Anyway, sleep well. Addie and Lily send their love. James ruffled her hair. Send them mine, too, she said, her voice trembling slightly. She only had to keep it together for a little while longer, she sternly told herself. She trudged back up to the castle, her feet as heavy and silent as her heart. Her housemates would want to celebrate, she knew. Probably a party had already begun in the common room in her honor. She wouldn't be good company that night, however, so she would beg off, plead exhaustion, wash the night away in the shower and crawl into bed. Maybe, if fate was kind for once, she wouldn't have to get out of it until the following night. Maybe she'd feel better when she woke. Maybe, well, maybe a lot of things. -0, 0, 0. -0, 0. -0. End of chapter 8.